Good evening and welcome to We the People, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis. My name is Joan Higginbotham and I'll be your host for this evening's program. The Metropolitan Council is something we hear about a lot on the news, but most of us are not too sure what it is or what it does. So tonight we're going to learn a little bit about it and also how it might impact your life in ways that you hadn't really thought about. Our guest this evening is Lisa Barajas, and she is the Director of the Community Development Division at the Metropolitan Council. So what does the Community Development Division do?
Sure, we're one of the 5 divisions at the Metropolitan Council, and you folks might be most familiar with Metro Transit. That's one of our divisions, and we have a transportation division as well that plans our metro highway system. And we have an environmental services division, which is our wastewater division, provides wastewater services, as well as water supply planning. In community development, we're responsible for the regional planning function. So we do the long-range planning on forecasting what our region's going to look like in the future, how much we're going to grow, and what that looks like for each community. We also provide local support to local governments and helping them do their local plans as part of that regional planning piece. And then we provide grants to local governments as well to help realize their planning visions, and so supporting development and affordable housing. And we also operate a housing and redevelopment authority.
Now, you've already taken half of the stuff that I was going to talk about, so we'll go back over those things
Sure.
again. But I think, first of all, let's do a little history lesson here. When did the Metropolitan Council get started and why?
Sure. Well, we celebrated our 50th anniversary just a couple of years
50
ago.
Years.
So in 1967, the legislature and the governor signed into law the formation of the Metropolitan Council. And there was a lot of regional civic discussion at that time around how to manage growth around the metro area. A lot was happening. Our regional bus system was failing and going bankrupt. We had a number of individual wastewater treatment plants. All the little communities around the metro area had their own, and they were all putting their discharge into our rivers and our lakes, and we had really terrible water quality at that time. Even in the Mississippi River, you couldn't find more than 1 fish in the whole length of the river in the metro. It was that unclean. So we had all of these regional issues that one city alone could not solve on its own, and the legislature and residents of the region had been discussing for several years before then of how are we going to address these problems. And they determined that a body like the Metropolitan Council should provide that regional oversight, not oversight, but really that regional look of how do we figure out these issues that one city alone can't solve, and how are some of those issues maybe better solved at a regional scale than by a city.
It seems to me that that was really unique, or it is almost still unique.
As a government body, it certainly is the only one like it in the nation. There are other similar regional bodies around the nation where local governments come together. Mm-hmm. They choose to participate, but not always all communities in that region would participate in those regional bodies.
So this is, now I know that's the 7-county metropolitan mm-hmm. area, so it's the 2 big counties, Hennepin and Ramsey, right. And then all the ones that circle around those 2? Basically?
Right. So then Anoka, Carver, Dakota, Washington, and Scott County.
And so those are all part of it. Right. Now, did they like vote to become part of the Metropolitan Council? I mean, as you said, it's kind of unusual that every little town in those counties is mm-hmm. a part of it.
Right. Actually, it was part of what the legislature determined should be part of the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan Council. So their representatives who, and not just regional representatives, but also representatives across the state, both in the House and the Senate, decided that this is something that would be good for the region.
So now, and I know that there have been times when there have been disagreements. How do they settle those?
Which type? I'm sorry, what type of disagreement?
Well, I mean, you know, somebody was saying, well, I don't think this housing plan fits my community.
Oh, sure.
You know, one solution.
Absolutely.
And is that where you jump into it?
Absolutely, that's the work that my staff and my division do. When we work on our regional planning efforts, you know, we're looking at forecasting growth for the region, but also what that means for each individual community. And that also gets down into details like, well, what is our region's affordable housing need going to be for this next decade? And what is each city's responsibility in helping to get to that need? So yeah, sometimes we do have disagreements on what those numbers should be or what that should look like. My staff work very closely with local government staff to figure out what makes sense, how we can still achieve the regional objectives and help local governments still meet their visions and their goals for their community
But now
as well.
it's been 50 years and nobody has dropped out.
Nobody has dropped out.
So that's got to be a sign of some kind of cooperation. Now, I would like to say that it's kind of a Minnesota thing, but I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, it seems to me that it takes a high degree of cooperation and trust, doesn't it?
There is quite a bit of cooperation and coordination, and it certainly isn't just a two-way street between the council and local governments. Part of the part of the formation of the council and then subsequent legislation, the Metropolitan Land Planning Act, which really gets down into the planning that local governments are required to do for their communities, really builds in this expectation that communities coordinate with one another in that effort before they even come to us. So really making sure that their trails and their roads connect with one another, that what's happening in one community isn't negatively impacting their neighbors, and not just city to city, but also up and down the scale of jurisdiction. So working with our federal partners if they, say, have a wildlife refuge in their community, working with our state partners if there, say, is state trail or a state park in their community, that all the agencies, all the governmental agencies agree that this plan is good for everybody. So that coordination has been something we've been doing since that passage in 1976.
So it seems to me that what you really have to be is you have to be able to convince people of the long-term benefit of what they're doing.
You know, one might say that would have been the case in the 70s when this first got underway, but I think because of the 40 years with the Metropolitan Land Planning Act and 50 years of the council's work, that we've been doing this as just how we do our business in the region for so long that it would feel unnatural not to work together.
And now, so we've got 7 counties, and each county has X number of representatives. Is it based on population or?
It is based on population, so it doesn't fall necessarily on county lines per se, but actually I think lines up a little bit closer to legislative district lines. So there is a certain amount of population that each district has that's equal. There are 16 council members that have a geographic district, and each of those has an equal population among them. So they don't quite line up with counties, but suffice it to say
that there would be areas that these representatives are familiar with,
absolutely,
or live in or live near, whatever. So now, the one thing that I thought was interesting, you mentioned Metro Transit, and that really, that's a huge thing. And how did that come about? I mean, because buses out in like Egan would be very different from buses in the central city of St. Paul.
Right. So that was part of that initial discussion, like I had mentioned earlier, where we also had, in addition to the water quality issues that the region was facing, we also had a failing transit system at that time as well. It was privately run, it was kind of on its last legs, and things weren't going well. And the legislature had found that it was vitally important to have a healthy, active, working transit system that met the needs of the region and not just a handful of communities that might be able to afford to put transit in their communities. So that was part of the formation of the different agencies at that time. Metropolitan Council was one of them. A regional transit board was established at that time as well. And then in the 1990s, there was new legislation that I think we commonly refer to it as the Umbrella Act, that brought the different agencies under to be all part of the Metropolitan Council together. So the Metro Transit became part of the Metropolitan Council, and what was, I think it was the Waste Control Commission, I don't quite remember the name, also became part of the council, so now our Environmental Services Division.
Well, it seems to me that it can be a very efficient system if it works, can it? Because there aren't duplication of efforts and.
Absolutely. Not only is it more efficient, but it also is easier for our riders. If we talk about transit, it's easier for our riders to get from one location in the region to another location with a single fare, that they can use the same fare card in that they use in Minneapolis as they would use in Eagan, and have that seamless travel and not have to worry about, well, what do I do once I get to Eagan? Now I have to go find another pay station to buy a fare to get on this bus. You don't have to do that here.
So it's really now, and you also have the part of that system is the light rail.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And that is one of those things that has been very successful.
Yes, we've had quite a bit of, our ridership projections. We've exceeded our expectations almost year over year since that's opened, and we also see that in some of our recent reporting that it really is also spurring folks to want to live and develop closer to our stations along our transit lines. When we think about what's happening even ahead of Southwest or Green Line extension opening out in the suburbs to the southwest here, the amount of development interest that we've seen along those lines for folks to locate closer to that transit and to have that access has been really astounding.
So people are thinking ahead that this is going to be the place to either live or to build something for other people to live in.
Right, exactly.
Well, now the thing that really interested me is that there are, it says here, 40 regional trails and 53 regional parks. And so the park system is also part of the Met Council.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, you're right, that's in my division. I should have mentioned that earlier. It is one of the regional systems that we're responsible for planning. And we do that planning in coordination with 10 other agencies in the metro area who actually own and operate the regional parks and trails. We coordinate the regional planning piece, deciding what's in the system, what isn't in the system, what maybe is serving more of a local need and what's serving the regional need. And we set some pretty high standards for what our expectations are for what a regional park or park reserve should look like. These are pretty large parks, kind of equivalent to a state park, but for the metro area. So we have a handful of state parks in the metro,
well, I was going to say, what about the upper Mississippi? That's going to be a regional park, or it is a regional park?
You're right, we have up the North Mississippi Gateway Regional Park, I think is the name of them. Like you said, we have a number of parks. I don't always remember the names of all of them. But yes, and there's a lot of work that the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board has been doing over the last 4 or 5 years, and probably longer, to really make that, improve that access to the river for residents that live nearby, but also to make it a destination for other residents in the region.
So that really is a good example of something that doesn't just impact one city, even though it is we sort of think of it as a city park in Minneapolis.
Right, and certainly there are some local functions that some of our parks serve, but certainly the attraction that folks have from across the region to get onto the river, to travel in the river, and to kayak. We know how many folks already do that today, and to be able to provide that access all along the river is something that is really exciting, and that opportunity to expand that, being part of the regional system, also helps us to support that with our regional funds as well.
Now, and I know that also then the trails do the same thing. I mean, the trails connect not just one region, but also other regions.
Right, so our regional trails is really where we're, in addition to some of our parks that we have planned to add to our system over the next 20 to 30 years, our regional trails is where we're expecting to do quite a bit more expansion. We have just over 350 miles of trails, of regional trails today, that connect many of our regional parks together and also connect folks from across the region to the parks. We're planning to expand that to 1,100 miles of trails, and really trying to make that a full system where you can recreate and travel from one park to another park within our region on our trails.
Now, I know I have my little state park sticker. Do you have to have some kind of a sticker to use the regional parks and trails as well?
Not for regional trails. Different regional parks, the different 10 agencies have different access ways of entering the parks, not necessarily stickers in all cases. Sometimes it's just parking, like in the Minneapolis park system.
You pay a certain amount.
Right, you pay a certain amount. But the idea is to keep it as accessible for folks as possible. But obviously our park agencies still need to maintain the system, and will still need to generate some revenue to make that work.
Now, so what you do then, it doesn't sound like it is, you're coordinating all these regional and local plans. So if some small community maybe doesn't have the staff or doesn't have the know-how, do you then help them?
Oh, absolutely, and that's actually where my staffs have spent a lot of their time over the last several years, is on helping to both build that capacity and provide additional support for especially smaller communities, either smaller communities or communities that just have fewer staff than are expected, or that than some of our larger cities have. So we've done additional support both through a grant program to help pay for local governments to actually get their plans done. They might need to hire a consultant or an engineer to help them do some of their planning efforts, or a planning consultant to do that. We also have provided a 2-year series of planning on planning topics for how to update a comprehensive plan on the very specific topics along the way. What does it mean for your housing? What does it mean for your parks or your land use? And did that in both in-person workshop trainings, on online tutorials, and in webinars as well. And many of those, especially the online pieces, are still available today, so folks can go back and look at it when they need it. And not just for local planning staff, but we also know in many of our smaller communities that the elected officials or planning commissioners themselves are taking on the work of updating their plans.
So this is really, I mean, this must be sort of a challenge for some of these small towns, or small communities, I should say. If they didn't have your help, they wouldn't be able to make the progress maybe they've made. Is that true?
Certainly it can be a challenge. We've heard folks say that it is a big undertaking, and there are a lot of things that they need to address. So our goal over these last 5 or 6 years really has been to make that as easy as possible, to all those baseline requirements that we have to make sure that they are connecting to our wastewater system in the right way, to make sure they're getting this thing. Those things that we think are baseline infrastructure elements, we've tried to make that part as easy as possible so that they can spend their time focusing on how their vision for their community and how they want to see their community grow or respond to growth and change over time.
So it's their decision, in a sense.
Right.
But they have some minimum requirements that they need to do.
Right, and those minimum requirements are really around those infrastructure pieces. They're really around the pieces of making sure that we know when they're programming growth, so that we have the wastewater in place to serve them in time, where they might connect to trails, where they might connect to our regional highway system.
So now, do you always agree?
I would say for the most part, we do usually agree on everything. There are places where we don't agree, and that's really where we work with staff first at the staff level to see, can we figure this out? Knowing what our policymakers each want to get done, are there ways where we can find a solution that will make both of them happy? And for the most part, we solve most of our problems at that level.
Now, I know that. I was really interested in, as you pointed out earlier, now we have one of the best wastewater systems in the country, right?
Oh, we certainly do, and some of the best rates in the nation as well.
And that is one of those things. That must be something that not everybody does. I mean, people must have problems if they don't cooperate the way the Met Council operates.
Right. In other regions, we certainly see pretty regularly a number of issues, and I'm going to paraphrase my environmental services colleagues. I'm not going to quite get it all right, but certainly in other regions, they still have historic systems like our system. Many of our older communities across the nation have wastewater systems built in the late 1800s that also combine stormwater into the sewer, and then when you'd have big storm events, that would overflow into your water bodies. We used to have that problem in this region, but together through cooperation with the council in our cities, we've been able to remove that combined sewer overflow, and we are not under what is called a consent decree, where the federal government is mandating you to fix it. A lot of our major cities around the country are facing that issue, but we are not in this region.
Now, I have heard that there are some communities that are saying, well, really, are we getting any benefit from this? And some there was I don't know if it was a very big movement, but somebody said, well, we're gonna leave the Metropolitan Council.
Sure. I mean, that would be interesting to see how they might be able to leave. We're such an interconnected community. It'd be hard to be an island in this region and not be participating with every other community and how we solve these regional issues together. I mean, some of the functional issues around wastewater alone is an example of that. It's hard to opt out of the system when we've already put the infrastructure in the ground that serves you today. But it doesn't, I think, behoove any of us to have people opt out or communities opt out, because we all face the same, both the same problems, and we need to solve those problems together. And so when you're not participating in that conversation, you're also not helping to solve those problems.
You don't also get a say in the outcome either.
Right.
So that would be another reason. Well, I'm sure that everybody has their own concerns about their own community, but that's where your staff gets involved to help people make a decision that will help their community.
Right, absolutely. And my staff work with our engineers and transportation and transit planners across the council as well, and bring that expertise to those conversations to be sure that we're giving them, having the right people at the table to help figure out some of these issues, whether it's timing of a wastewater improvement to help solve a development issue locally, or someone wants to have a new transit service in their community. We're helping them figure out what they need to do to get there.
One of the issues that we hear the most about really is housing and the population. So what is going to happen to our population? And now you did the 2040 plan, and it was or not 2040 until. It was done in 2010, was it? A 30-year plan?
The Metropolitan Council adopted that plan in 2015.
2015.
But you're right, it goes through 2040. Thrive MSP 2040 is what it's called.
And so what were some of the striking things that you found that we have to be thinking about as we plan for 2040?
Sure. Well, we know that we're still a growing region, and this is in some places where we're different than other regions, where despite the economic downturn, we saw a slowdown, but we kept growing at a slower pace.
It was still a positive trend.
We were still positive trend,
Wow.
right? We were not losing population here. So we're expecting to grow around 800,000 additional residents by the year 2040.
So how much of a percentage would that be? Do you know?
Well, I wouldn't be able to say that off the top of my head. I can tell you that we have just over 3 million people today. So some of that growth is captured in that since we did that in 2015. So in these last couple of years, we've grown it. You've been seeing that development around. We have been adding population these last couple of years, right on pace with what we were expecting. But we also know we're an aging population. By 2040, we expect to have a larger proportion of our population be over the age of 65. I think about 1 in 5 of our residents will be over the age of 65 by 2040. We're also an increasingly diverse region. Right now, we're about 20% people of color. By 2040, we expect to be about 40% people of color.
Really? Doubling it in 15 years?
Over this, since our time frame,
yeah.
Since 2015, right, of having that change from 20% to 40%. So we have these dynamics that are influencing how we live and work and what our needs are as a region, how we travel in our region with an aging population, but also with a growing population in other ways that are influencing that. But we also have these other big trends too that we're thinking about. Funding for transportation projects, for example, isn't as readily available as it had been maybe 10 or 15 years ago. We also have increasing concern around our water supply and contamination that we found in certain parts of the metro area that might be limiting for us.
So this, as you go forward, some of these things might be exacerbated by the population growth as well.
Well, there's certainly things that we need to think about as we plan for how our population is going to continue to grow, is what do we do with these factors and giving these factors
now,
in mind.
how is it going to grow? I mean, is it going to grow from people moving in, or is it going to grow from people having babies, or what is the?
Yes and yes.
Oh.
Yes, both people coming here, but also people and having families and growing their families as well.
So as you look at this, what are the things that really, as at the Met Council is thinking about, what is the thing that they say, this is the thing that we have to really focus on for the next 15 years or 25 years, whatever it is?
Well, we're a big agency, and like I had mentioned earlier, we do
many things.
We do a lot of things. So we have a lot of things that we really need to focus on, and that each of our agencies or each of our divisions have their focus on that. So, my division right now is really focused on both comprehensive planning and helping communities get their plans done and adopted locally.
No, when do they have to do a new plan every 5, 10, 15? 2 years? How often?
Every 10 years.
Every 10 years.
That's what's required in law. And so that deadline for them to submit was just this December 31st that passed now. So we're right in the thick of plans and helping communities get those done. But that's a right now issue. But we also are really interested in a high priority of playing our role in helping to solve our housing issues in this region.
I was going to ask you about that because, as I said, that seems to be something that everybody's concerned about. And
absolutely.
I mean, people talk about how expensive it is to rent and how few places there are to rent.
Right. So one of the things that we do in community development is we do a lot of research, and we help lay that landscape of what's happening in our region. And we actually just released a report earlier this week about our affordable housing production in 2017, and seeing that we're falling further behind in production and not keeping up with demand.
So now we see that that's happening, but now is it the Met Council's job to say we're falling behind, or is it then the Met Council's job to say we're falling behind, so this is what we have to do?
Well, we already have a plan about how to address housing, and we're asking both communities to take that seriously as part of their planning process, and what local governments play a role in that as well. But we're also looking at, well, what else can we do to help move production forward, looking at our own grant programs, looking at how we partner with other agencies, and looking at other things that are within our authorities to help move production forward, to help connect people to housing, to help make it easier for our residents that use our Housing Choice Voucher program in our housing authority, to help them find housing even, because that's increasingly difficult.
It seems to me that this is really probably one of the most serious problems that we face, and even in attracting a workforce.
Certainly, if we don't have the right housing to support a workforce, then we'll have a hard time supporting the businesses that we have here. And we're very fortunate to have a strong economy in this region, but making sure that folks both have housing that they can afford and also have housing near their jobs is really important.
Now, so that's another question of the whole situation is, how do you help the local communities figure this out? I mean, I'm sure there must be some pushback. I mean, I remember the people that have the 5-acre yards or whatever, and they don't want to have small lots or whatever.
So certainly there's still some of that. I think we've seen a little bit of that change over time, especially in these last couple of years as people are starting to see that more and more, and our employers are being more vocal about, we don't have our workforce nearby, you need to help us get them here. And so the housing is becoming a more important local issue we've seen in our conversations with local governments. So we've been really down in the strategies and tactics of, here are the types of tools you can do in your land use, here are the types of things you can do in your plan or in your zoning, and here are the different funding opportunities that are available, and let's think about how we might position some of these to be competitive for that, to help you get these resources locally.
I know 2040 is Minneapolis's plan, right? Or St. Paul's, I'm not sure which, but the plan there is to be denser downtown or denser in the city. Is that something that you work with even large cities like Minneapolis and St. Paul on?
We do work with all our communities in the metro area, so there's a lot of them on that, but where communities decide to support their growth and development is up to them, and we need to be sure that we have the services available to support where they want to have that growth occur. And
so that you can sort of give them the tools that make those decisions, is that right?
We can help them, we can give them those resources, right, the tools and the background on infrastructure and wastewater capacity, all those kind of weedy, down in the details things. We give them those things so they can help decide with their residents where they'd like to see growth occur.
And even like a small town, do they have any kind of housing authority or housing people, I mean, in a little community? Or
most smaller communities don't have housing specialists, that's for sure, and that's where we really try to provide as much assistance as we can.
So you really are the people that help get the job done for many different size communities.
When they ask, we are happy to help.
Great. Well, I hope this gives you a little idea about what the Met Council is all about and really how it does impact your life. Thanks to our guest this evening, Lisa Barajas, who's the Director of the Community Development Division at the Met Council, and this is Joan Higginbotham for the League of Women Voters saying, thanks for tuning in to We the People.